Hello and welcome. Now you saw the game, how it works. Now I will explain you what codes were placed behind the stage of the game itself. Now I just used three codes only, although the fourth code was for creating a login ID and password, which I used from a third-party source, which I have already referenced. And now let's move on to the main code that come into play. The first and the biggest code is the scene code itself. Here, as you can see, I have clearly indented every piece of code to be in right section and in the left section based on their functions. So I just have made different scenes, and in total 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 scenes, and each scene will just transfer to another scene to make it look like the game's flow is going in a smoother way. Now let's move on to the destroy button script. This script is basically for the players to click on any button, and it sets that button to be off. And by any, I mean any of the buttons from inhale and exhale. Now let's move on to the lerp sound. Now this is actually a really tricky code that I started to think about. I wanted to have sound inside the scenario to go from 0 to 1 volume wise, but that's a really slow process. So therefore I made a private float which I only can take care of, and of course a public float to let me know how much time it takes for the volumes to go from 0 to 1. Now I also got an audio source which I just made a get component audio source from, and I said the start time will be time itself, just the beginning of the frame time. Now in the update function, because it's run every once per frame, I said if the start time and whatever float comes in the time duration is greater than the time that begin on each frame, if this is happening, meaning the start time and the duration is becoming greater than each frame of time, meaning it will. And if this is the case, then the float time calculation, which is a new float by the way, is time of each frame at the beginning of each frame minus the start time, which by the way is the beginning of each frame as well, divided by time duration, which is just a float. And this basically is a calculation to get how much time does it take within each frame to go from 0 till the end of the frame, which is 1. Now I say that in the traffic audio's volume, which is an audio source component, there should be a lerp function happening, which comes from the math f function. Now there are three parameters in this function: the 0 parameter, the n parameter, which is 1, and then the third parameter actually is a float, which I calculated here. So basically from the volume to go from 0 to 1, it will go depending on this particular time that's calculated between each frame. So in a way what it does is it broadens the time and says from 0 till 1 there will be a big time loop, or I would say time period. I would say these four codes are the big part of actually making the patients feel the outburst or feel the panic which could trigger the outburst. That is why I formulated a calculation from which a time period was derived between 0 of volume to the fullest volume, which is 1, and that's how it came to be, that the volume goes from nothing to a high volume, but at a really slow duration. And that duration comes from this calculation itself. Now, thank you so much for your time and patience, and I hope you understood the bit of code here. I will be putting the codes in GitHub, so feel free to play around with this code and let me know if you have any questions. Thank you.